or say hi to my hand, I guess. You are about to start watching your first video for English class this year. Just a brief overview of how to use this video and the videos that follow. Essentially, just make sure you're listening carefully, and whenever I tell you to do something, follow the directions. If I tell you to pause and do something, pause the video and do what I ask you to do. Or, if you are confused about something, feel free to rewind and go over and over again as many times as you need until you understand the concept that I'm explaining. At the same time, you're going to need to pay attention to what I'm writing. So if I don't say something, but I write it down, it might also be really important to write down. So reminders, when I write, you should probably be writing. When I explain something, you might want to write down some notes on what I'm explaining. And when I tell you to pause, it's a good idea to pause and carry out the action that I recommend. In this case, we are about to dive into the idea of plot. Now, this should be very familiar to all of you. However, I think it's important to review because when we write our own stories, we need to make sure that they follow a structure. The reason for this is that if our stories do not follow this structure, then they will not make sense to our reader. Think about when you tell stories to your mom, to your friends. You always start somewhere. You build until the climax or the punchline, the biggest event in your story, and then you kind of explain what happens after and how things are going for you now. So if you think of the way you tell stories in your day-to-day life, then it only makes sense that the stories you write in English class also follow that trajectory. Now, like I said, follow along and take notes where you need to. If you can't read something or you can't hear something, try and rewind, try and zoom in, or just ask me, okay? This is a video, but I'm available to explain things in more detail if the video doesn't cover something that you would like to know. Now, please write your name on top of this worksheet. It's called Plot Structure Notes. And also make sure that you have this worksheet, Plot Sketch Notes. Okay? This is what we're building to, this piece of paper. But to get there, we need to do notes on here first. Let me explain what this is very quickly. So this is where you are actually going to summarize your story, the points in your story. So we'll explain what all of these things are in a moment. But this is for your own notes, not for the notes that go along with this video. So this sheet should be blank until the end of the video when you go on and fill it in on your own. All right, here we go. So this is the general arc of a story or a narrative. Since we are writing narratives, we are going to follow this structure so that way our readers are going through what we're going through what the characters are going through, and really building up to that intense moment in the story. That way it's meaningful to them, and they're getting as much out of the story as they can because they're taking the journey. So, we're going to start off by explaining what exposition means. This is the beginning of the story, okay? It's the beginning. Okay, this is where all of the description, not all, of course there's description throughout the story, but this is where setting is established. Characters are described. And the way things are is conveyed or described. The way things are, okay? So this means For example, with To Kill a Mockingbird, I know you all read that in 8th grade. Think back for me. In To Kill a Mockingbird, which I'm going to write here for an example, T-K-A-M, To Kill a Mockingbird. Our exposition is we start to learn about Maycomb. Scout tells us about Maycomb. We learn about her family. We see what her life is like. Okay? I'm going to write something else here because this is very important. Descriptions. Okay, descriptions are key during the exposition. If you want your reader to really understand the place that your story takes place, or the people that your story is about, and get them interested in it and make it feel like they're there themselves as they're reading, you need to make sure you have plenty of descriptions and details. Okay? Ready to move on to the rising action. Now this spans throughout the whole entire climb here. Okay? The rising action is the series of conflicts that lead to the climax, okay? Okay, if you remember, I know in 6th grade, most of you probably, maybe you don't remember this, but in 6th grade you had to write something called The Hero's Journey when you read Percy Jackson. There was something called A Road of Trials, where your character went through little conflicts here and there that brought them enough knowledge and skills to be successful in the climax. Same goes here. The same thing goes for rising action in traditional narratives like this, okay? This is where your character experiences enough challenges to learn from that will prepare him or her for the climax. So your character learns from conflicts, let's go with conflicts again. Conflicts and challenges that prepare him or her for the climax, but more importantly, for success in the climax. Okay? So in To Kill a Mockingbird, that generally is when school starts and Scout no longer is just dealing with her family, so school is starting. Atticus accepting the case is actually a conflict. Scout starts finding things in Boo's tree. Okay, so all these things here and there that your character learns from, it can be conflicts, it can just be events. It doesn't need to be conflicts, but generally we think of them as conflicts and challenges. Learning experiences, okay? Conflict, this is when the major problem is introduced. Okay, in To Kill a Mockingbird, the conflict is Atticus takes on Tom Robinson's case. Okay, and also for Scout, Scout takes an interest in Boo Radley. Okay? Now, the climax, this is really, really important, guys. It cannot just be a simple little event. It has to be the big event. Now, when I say the big event, I mean the event that the whole story is building up toward, okay? It has to be the most important turning point for that character over the course of the whole story, okay? So climax is, I'll write it again, the big event, or I guess I'll write it once, I'll say it again. It's the big event, or the turning point and the most intense point in the story. The most intense moment in the story. The next part is key, okay? Success is imperative. Oops, that's supposed to have two C's. Success is imperative. Now, imperative is just a fancy word for necessary, okay? It has to happen. Now, this might be a life and death situation, or this might be the make or break point for the character's happiness, or perhaps their social life or their relationships are either going to succeed or fail at this moment in the story. Okay, in To Kill a Mockingbird, the climax is when Tom Robinson is found guilty. Now, the reason why this is the climax is because this is the point at which all of the tensions in the story come to a head, okay? The tension between Atticus and the townspeople, the tension between Bob Ewell and Tom Robinson, the tension between Bob Ewell and Atticus's kids. He has a grudge against them, as we know, in how he attacks them later on in the story, okay? So this is where everything turns around, okay? Falling action, or denouement, which is a French word, means that it means basically all of the action that comes after the climax, okay? It shows how the climax impacts the characters. Yeah, impacts the characters. Okay, another thing is some tension is released. Okay, again in To Kill a Mockingbird. Don't ask me why I wrote it that way. This is when Tom tries to escape it, but he's shot. And Bob Ewell attacks the kids on their way home from the play. All right, and last but not least, we have our resolution/conclusion. Okay, the major conflict by the conclusion. It can happen over the falling action, but it has to be resolved by the conclusion. Okay, the major conflict is resolved there is a return to normalcy. And also, there is a release of emotions for the reader. This is important. There is a release of emotion for the reader. Fun fact, a release of emotion is called catharsis. And so, to summarize what we just talked about, we have to have a really strong exposition/introduction, which means that we want our story to come alive to our readers by describing the setting, the time, and all of the characters that are going to be really important. So you're going to really want to watch the video about descriptive language to solidify your introduction and make sure that it's really strong. And then rising action is going to be the smaller conflicts or events that lead up to the climax. Okay? These are important learning experiences for our main characters. And then we have the conflict. This can be introduced high on the rising action, or it can be introduced early on. It doesn't really matter where you put it, but you have to make sure that you're introducing the conflict that will be addressed during the climax at some point on this rising action. The climax is the most important event. Everything is make or break here. Success is imperative or necessary, has to happen, or the character will fail and the story will not go well. And then falling action is where all of the smaller conflicts get resolved, some tension is released, and the impact of the climax kind of manifests in the characters' lives. And then resolution or conclusion, again, is when the major conflict is absolutely resolved and there's a return to normalcy. Alright, and that's our plot structure notes. What you're going to do now is take your plot structure, your plot sketch notes, and you are going to bullet your ideas in here. And if you need more room or you just want to go into more detail, the back is blank, so feel free to use the back as you wish. But start off with things that you really want to describe, your setting, your characters. What are some things you really want your readers to know about at the beginning, okay? And then go on using your notes that you took here to help you with this worksheet. And again, if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, get to work.